Welcome to the ISMM Level 5 Diploma, and this unit is 501, which is Understanding and Developing Customer Accounts. What are the learning outcomes? Well, very much it's all about how do we choose suppliers, how do your customers choose who to work with, and then how do you develop a customer account plan. In terms of guided learning hours, as we know, this varies depending on the learner, how much experience that you've had before in this field. But very much the ISMM would say that the guided learning hours are 40 and the credit value is 8. So there are 5 learning outcomes, of which we are going to be covering the first one today. And the first one is understanding buying practices of customers. Secondly, understand customer support issues. Thirdly, understand your own organization's unique business value. Fourth, be able to prepare for customer procurement. And lastly, be able to use information gathered to plan to develop customer accounts. So let's kick off with learning outcome 1. And that's broken down into 6 areas. The first one, evaluate the organizational and personal influence of the decision-making unit, the DMU, on buying practices. Secondly, evaluate choice criteria of customers and how such criteria affect sales. The third is review the concept of preferred supplier status. 1.4 is identify buying practices used by organizations. 1.5, evaluate measures of quality relating to buying and accredited quality programs. And last learning outcome for 501 is to identify capability and capacity assessments customers undertake on potential suppliers. So let's kick off with 1.1. So the learning outcome 1.1 is all about evaluating the organizational and personal influence of the DMU, the decision-making unit of buying practices. And this is very much the group of the group of individuals who are responsible for making a buying decision in a business-to-business context. Okay, let's take a look at each of these in a little bit more detail. And actually, it's not a 1 to 2 to 3 step process here. All of these people or departments will have various roles to play at various points in the procurement process. Okay. So if we take a look at some of these, so for example, the user, this would be an individual who's actually using the product or service right now. So of course, we need to get their opinion on what works and what doesn't work. Without that ear to the ground, if you like, without somebody at the coalface actually genuinely be able to give us that feedback, how on earth do we know what works and how to make it better? The second part of this is the influencer. Now, once we've identified what works and what doesn't, the influencer will be that person who can then start to set a criteria for some of the things that we need for the future. So it could be we put together a work group, a stakeholder meeting in terms of all the people that have relevant a stake in the outcome of this project. We could have a situation whereby they become the influencer, because if I've been invited into a work group, I now have the opportunity to set the criteria for the future. So people who would be involved with that, we could call the influencer. The buyer, well, the buyer is this person who will now get involved with actually negotiating the deal. So they will be dealing with a supplier. It could be it's now been whittled down to a few suppliers. So we may have gone through a procurement process, a buying tender process, with an information to tender. We've now got a situation where 2 or 3 have gone through, and now we're at the point where now we're negotiating the deals. This could be in terms of terms and conditions. It could be the length of contract. It could be the schedule, the delivery schedule. It could be, of course, the price. So this is very much when the buyer comes into their own and actually starts to negotiate the deal. What do we mean by the initiator? Well, the initiator is probably the person who's identified that we've got a problem in the first place. So they're the ones who have said, actually, what's currently happening isn't working. We need to find another solution. So they may be the ones who have identified that this is the problem, and actually we now need to go and find a better way of doing it. Let's go and speak to the user and find out their opinion. Let's go and set up a work group in terms of an influencer. Let's really start to understand how we can do this thing better. So they're almost like the catalyst that starts to make this whole process happen. What do we mean by the decider? Well, I guess in terms of the buyer, they often need to get that signed off by a more senior individual. So our decider would be the approver in terms of, it could be the financial director, it could be the CEO, it could be just somebody, just to give it the final check through to make sure we're happy to sign off this contract. And lastly, the gatekeeper. Well, what do we mean by the gatekeeper? This could be simply somebody who is gathering information that's required by the various other people or departments. It could be the filter to stop too much information coming through. It could be the person or the department that actually set up the ITT and start to get organisations tendering for this piece of work before we whittle it down to the final 2 or 3 organisations where the buyer starts coming into their own. So the gatekeeper could have a number of roles here, but it's very much a gathering of information type role. So let's talk about, we've spoken about the DMU, but let's talk about the internal and external factors that would affect that. Firstly, with the internal factors, and pretty much the 2 things that we need to be aware of is A, culturally, do we have a flatline structure? Is there a hierarchical structure to the organisation? Because that will depend and very much influence the way that we work with them. So what are the values of the organisation? Do they have a vision in place? Do you have a firm understanding of the way that this company like to work? Because that will also affect their decision-making processes. How many people will be involved in the decision-making process? Let's say if it's a flat hierarchical structure, then actually it's probably not going to be too many. Therefore, you may find that within the DMU, they often double up on roles. So the initiator may be the user, and maybe feeding that back to the buyer. They may be gathering the information as the gatekeeper as well. So that will really depend on the sort of organisation, the culture that you are dealing with. And then, I guess the more rational processes, do they have a PSL? Do they have a preferred suppliers agreement? Do they have a list? Do you have to get onto that list before you even start the deal with this company? And how do you get on that list? Secondly, what is the sign-off process from start to end? So, do you need to get in right at the beginning to be able to influence that decision-making process? Or literally, is it a tender type process where you have to wait for the ITT, submit that application, and then go through the various levels and rounds of that tender process? And lastly, what's happened before? So if you've already dealt with this organisation, you probably have a good understanding as to what their culture looks like and what the processes are. But if you haven't dealt with them, do you know anybody who has? So can we just get some understanding of how they work? What is the process? Typically, how long does it take? Typically, how many rounds are there? Typically, how many people do you need to work through to actually ultimately get a decision through the DMU? So they're very much the internal factors that affect our buying decisions. Let's take a look at the external factors. Well, I guess the easiest way of looking at external factors is looking at good old Pestle. So Pestle talks about politics, economics, social, technological, legal and environmental implications on an organisation. Okay, so what do we mean by politics? Well, this will be, what is going on in terms of government policy and regulations within your industry that will affect this whole decision-making process. Is there any funding? Are there initiatives out there? Are there any grants that the organisation that you're trying to deal with can get access to? So very much when we're looking at the political side of an organisation, we need to really be asking what is out there, what are the agreements in place, and how will this manifest in terms of tax policies, government involvement and trading agreements. So these are the areas that we need to look in terms of the economy. In terms of politics, in terms of the economy, well, what is the economy like at the moment? Are we in a buoyant market? Do we have low interest rates? What are inflation rates like? What are labour costs, energy costs out there? What is the cost of unemployment? What's the level of unemployment? Where are we with energy prices, petrol, steel, interest rates, monetary policies, exchange rates? All of these things will influence the economy, and that will influence very much externally the buying decisions that are going on within an organisation. So if you're pitching for any business, you need to be thinking about what are the pressures economically that the organisation that you're working with are under. Same with the politics. Are they under any political pressure to deliver certain areas? So for example, there may be some areas that quite literally they never had to think about before, but because the government has now introduced a policy, we need to adhere to it. Socially, well, what's going on from a socio-cultural situation? So social cultural factors represent the culture of the society that an organisation works within. So for example, what are the age distribution? What are the demographics? What are population growth rates? What's the level of education within the sort of sector and industry or the geographical area that you're working with? What's the distribution of wealth, the social classes, the living conditions, the lifestyle? So if you're looking often to get into a new geography, these social questions are so important to just understand that you understand the external factors that may be affecting. So for example, if you're working with the City of London, the demographic of the City of London will be very different to maybe some of the more remote areas of the UK. The wage demands are clearly going to be different. So these are the sort of factors that you need to be thinking about. Technological. What are the technologies that are affecting your bid and the decision-making process? For example, emerging technologies. How is the web affecting this in various ways? How is digital making advances that actually could mean that what you're proposing could be out of date very quickly? So very much, it needs to be the rate of new inventions, development, changes in information, what mobile technology is available, the changes in the internet, the changes of e-commerce, mobile commerce. We're doing so much more now with mobile than we ever dreamed that we would. And therefore, the technological developments on digital and internet-related areas are vital to you understanding the external factors that are affecting this area. Moving on, legally. What are the legal ramifications? So, employment law. What are the areas around policy standards? In Unit 401, we spoke about trading standards, the Sale of Rights Act. All of these areas need to be understood to ensure that you are following legal obligations. And of course, political factors are entwined within legal factors. The difference between legal and politics is that politics tends to refer to attitudes and approaches, whereas legal factors are those which become law and regulation. So you need to stay on the right side of the law. You need to understand what the company you're pitching to have to adhere to. So this is absolutely vital when you're putting together any sort of pitch. And lastly, the environment. So we're very much becoming a greener society. So how is that affecting the company that you're pitching to? What are the pressures that they're under? Do they have ISO 14001? What are the environmental policies that A, they have, B, they need to achieve? What are their suppliers and their customers? Do they have various environmental policies? So what are the environment, but not only the environment, it's also the ethical issues around pollution, waste, recycling. What are all the areas that they need to cover? So these are very much the external factors that would be affecting the company's buying decisions. Moving on to learning outcome 1.2. So this is evaluate the choice criteria of customers and how such criteria affect sales. Now, we often on our programs talk about Seth Godin. He talks about it not just being about profit. He talks about the hierarchy of business needs. And he says, quite interesting, making a profit is often at the very, very top. There's other things, there's other levels. It's a bit like Maslow, his hierarchy of needs. We're very much talking about what are the other areas that companies need to think about. And his point would be profit is of course important, but there are other fundamental needs that a company would have. For example, he would say avoiding risk is the fundamental level in terms of they have to make sure they avoid risk before they do anything else. Once they've done that, they don't want any hassle. Once they've done that, we need to start getting praise for what we're doing, recognition in the marketplace for what we're doing. That will then lead to power, it will allow to enjoyment, with then ultimately the byproduct of that should be that we have fun. So very much we need to think about when you're trying to propose to a decision-making unit, are we limiting risk? Are we mitigating risk? What are the areas that we're doing in terms of this area? Because these are the sort of criteria that will affect whether or not we actually get these sales. 1.3, review the concept of the preferred supplier status. Well, what do we mean by a preferred supplier? Well, it's one of the best strategies, of course, for ensuring a long-term relationship with your key customers. Being one of your customers' preferred supplier means that your enterprise is perceived to provide services of a higher value to the customer than your competitors will be doing. Because if I'm a preferred supplier, I must have gone through a number of criteria to achieve that status. So the due diligence has already been done by the customer. So they already know, yep, these guys meet the criteria. We know that we can do business with these guys. Their values are meeting with ours. Their criteria meets with what we're looking for from a decent and trusted organisation. Therefore, it's probably now going to come down to the other criteria, of which price and terms and conditions and speed of delivery may be some of those areas. So very much they're the sort of companies that they like to do business with. So preferred supplier is incredibly important in terms of really trying to just gain a more trusted long-term relationship with an organisation. One of the things within ISMM is that we talk about using the case study of Proforce Recruit versus the rugby group. And it was quite an interesting case study, definitely worth getting your hands on this, because it very much, the whole case focused on what did we mean by the term preferred supplier. Now, the judge actually concluded that a preferred supplier status did not mean sole supplier status, or a supplier could expect to be approached first. Because the whole argument was, does preferred supplier mean that we're the only one, or if you're going to go to market, you approach me first because I'm a preferred supplier. It actually said that preferred supplier status remained open to the defendant to decide whether other suppliers should be granted a similar status, and the defendant did not commit itself to only doing business with such suppliers. In this case, of course, the defendant would be the customer. So quite interesting in terms of what this gives us as an organisation. I guess the real key is whether or not it's worth being a preferred supplier. Well, absolutely it is, because if the only way of getting onto the playing field is to have this status, then of course you need to achieve that. 1.4, so identifying buying practice that are used by organisations. And there are really 4 areas that we want to discuss here. 1 is the direct approach, 2, tendering, 3, e-procurement, and 4, the preferred suppliers list, which we've covered a little bit on this module already. So there are a number of approaches that can obviously be made. In terms of direct approach, this is when you contact an individual supplier direct. So it is what it is. You know, you're going to pick up the telephone, you're going to send out a direct mail, you're going to contact this organisation to do business with. Tendering, this is where an organisation sends out an invitation to a number of organisations to tender for their business. Of course, if you want government work, this is pretty much going to be the only way. If it's over a certain level of revenue, it's pretty much the only way that you're going to deal with them. E-procurement becoming more and more popular. E-tenders, absolutely incredible. E-bids, whereby literally there's 5 or 6 suppliers and we're all hanging on that on the web, and now the bid is coming down and we need to decide what we're going to do, and within 20 minutes or so the company have made their choice. So e-procurement and e-bids is becoming more and more popular in the marketplace. And lastly, of course, preferred suppliers list, the PSL. It's really about, does an organisation go out to tender at large, or does it just use what they have on their PSL? 1.5, evaluating the measures of quality relating to buying and accredited quality programs. Well, this is really just talking about a quality management system, a QMS. And all it is a collection of business processes focused on achieving quality. So, areas such as ISO 9000 would be a quality management system. And I guess right now, ISO 9000 would probably be the most widely implemented QMS out there at the moment. Inputs, well, very much in terms of inputs, covering this, what are the customer requirements? The outputs, these would be how satisfied are your customers with the actual result? And then in between, what are the areas that we work with? Well, very much within planning, we're defining, we're preparing the document, we're putting together exactly what it is that we say that we are going to do. Because quite simply, all you need to do with a quality management system is to say, these are the things that we say that we do. It's say what you do and do them. It's quite a simple process, a lot more difficult to do in practice, of course. So A, we need to plan and we need to document exactly what it is that we're going to do. Secondly, we then need to go and do it. We need to execute it. We need to plan, we need to execute the plan, and we need to record the results as how we get on with that, okay? So A, we write down what we're going to do. B, we go and execute it. C, we then need to check on how we're doing that. And that's where we measure, we compare, we actually have systems that will actually monitor the performance in various different areas. So log-in results, really having a performance management matrix documented to make sure that we understand and check how we're doing against our plan. So how is our execution doing against the plan? We need to be able to check that. And then lastly, of course, the final piece of that is once we monitor the results, how do we check whether or not that's actually meeting the required standard? So if it is, great. If it isn't, what do we do about that? So we need to evaluate the numbers and then we need to correct the performance if indeed that is required. So that simply is an overview of a quality management system, as I say, not ISO 9000 and the various forms of ISO 9000 would probably be the most widely used to do that. And then lastly, identifying capability and capacity assessments the customer undertakes on potential suppliers. So how do we get assessed by your supplier? Well, they will check various things. Are we financially stable? So they may need to want to see the last 3 years of audited accounts, for example. What are our service levels? Do we need to supply service level agreements? What are our service levels like currently with our current customers? What's our delivery like? Are we meeting our delivery schedule requirements? What's the quality of our product or services? Is that meeting certain quality standards? Corporate social responsibility, what are we doing in terms of adding back to the community? Are we take or are we giving back? For some organisations, that is now becoming absolutely vital. They will not deal with you unless you have a decent corporate social responsibility policy. And this links to sustainability. Are you a green company? So what is your environmental policy? What's your sustainability policy? Are you ISO 14001 accredited? What exactly are you doing there? And lastly, staff development. So are you invested in people, for example? What exactly are you doing in terms of training and improving the skills of the people that work with you? Because for a long-term relationship to work, your customer needs to be reassured that your staff will keep up with new developments. Therefore, if you can't promise them that you're consistently training, not only consistently training the new people, but consistently training the existing people, then that's going to be a down mark for you. So very much these are the main 7 areas that you will be assessed on. So let's summarise some of the areas that we've discussed. So there are 6 areas within the first learning outcome. So what are the main roles within the decision-making unit? Well, these are user, influencer, buyer, initiator, decider, and gatekeeper. And they may have individual people within each of those roles. You may have one person, depending on the size of the contract, dealing with a number of those roles, or you could have whole departments working within each of those roles. What are the internal factors affecting buying decisions? Well, really, that's all about the culture of the organisation and the current processes that they have in place. What does Pestle stand for? Well, that's political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. And these are all the different areas that you need to truly understand are affecting the company that you're trying to influence. Because these will be the things, the criteria that they're aware of in terms of making their decision-making process. What was the conclusion of the case study that we discussed, i.e. Proforce and Rugby Group? Well, actually, it did not mean sole supplier status and doesn't mean that you'll be contacted first if you are on the PSL, which I guess is good news if you're not currently on the PSL and trying to get into an organisation. What is the cycle used as ISO 9000? Plan, do, check, act, i.e. write it down, execute it, monitor the process, and if it's not working, do something about it. And then lastly, name the areas on which an organisation will evaluate its suppliers. We just touched on that. Typically, there will be 7, and these are financial stability, service, delivery, quality, sustainability, staff development, and your corporate social responsibility. So, in terms of task 1, for those of you who are going to go on and complete the assignments for Unit 501. The first area is understanding the buying practices of your customers. So this is the way that you need to answer this. You need to select one of your key customers, and our advice to you would be to make it a customer that's of a reasonable size so you can truly start to identify different roles and processes within the organisation. Firstly, what are the customer's internal organisational influences? So let's take a look at their values, their vision, and how are those areas affecting the way that they do business. And then secondly, what is a decision-making unit? What are the different roles? How many people are involved? What are the different levels that are involved within it? As I said, is it one person doing multiple roles? Is it a person assigned to each different role? Or actually is it whole departments that get involved with this process? So that's the first area. The second area is what are the external factors affecting the organisation in relation to your supplier relationship? So what's going on right now? What are the Pestle factors that to your knowledge will be actually affecting this company? So what's going on politically? What's going on economically? Are there any legal factors that you need to be worried about? What are the technological advances that are affecting this business? Are there any green issues that are absolutely affecting this company? So take a look at the whole area of Pestle and try and get an understanding as to what are the external factors. Thirdly, do they have a PSL? And if yes, what is the key criteria that is affecting this? If no, what are the factors that would move them to establishing a PSL situation? So just take a look at the whole PSL. How do you get on it? What are the factors that you have to be able to get on there? What is the process of getting onto a PSL? This whole piece of preferred supplier status is an area that you just need to understand more. And then lastly, what quality measures do they have? Do they have ISO 9000? Okay. What are the standards that they have in place to demonstrate that they are a quality company? More importantly, I guess, from your perspective, what standards do they require for the customers that work, for the suppliers, that work with them? Then moving on to the fifth area, we need to identify a person or the people in each of the different parts of the DMU. So this very much relates to the areas before, whereby we're starting to understand exactly what the decision-making unit looked like. And then for each person within the decision-making unit, you need to understand what are their primary needs, what will make their buying decisions, i.e. in terms of capability surveys, capability assessments. So how are they going to assess and decide who to work with? So quite a lot to get your teeth stuck into there. That concludes Learning Outcome 1. As always, our next module will lead on to Learning Outcome 2. But in the meantime, if you need any assistance, any advice in terms of how long the assignment should be or what are the areas that you need to go into a bit more depth, please contact us, www.lamore.com, or contact our office, where someone would be very, very happy to speak to you. In the meantime, have fun with that, and we look forward to speaking to you on the next module. Thank you.